Okay, we're going right back to basics. So, what are we going to look at to begin with? Well, we're going to look at this concept of production possibility frontier. So, it's a very simple diagram. In fact, that is one of its biggest flaws, that it is too simplistic. It doesn't really take into account the fact that an economy is extremely complicated. It actually only suggests that we have two industries that we can produce in. We produce either X or Y. Okay? Now, this diagram, despite being very simplistic, gives us a few really important concepts to work with. This line here, this curve, this production possibility frontier, tells us what would be our output if we used all of our available resources. So this gives us our potential output. Now, don't forget it's a trade-off. So if I produce this many of good Y, I don't have any resources left to produce any of good X. If I produce this many of good Y, then I can still produce this many of good X. So all the way along, there is a trade-off between the allocation of resources to this industry or the allocation of resources to this industry. Okay? Now that brings in a very interesting concept, doesn't it? One that we should have got our heads around already, one that we should understand, okay? It brings in the concept of opportunity cost. If I give up some of my production of good Y, then I gain good X. If I choose to increase my output of good X, I have to give up some of my output of good Y. Okay, so in that sense, we can use this diagram to show us this basic concept of opportunity cost. Okay, well, let's just go back to this for a moment. If we have our potential output that is anywhere along this line, normally economies do not operate at their full output levels. Normally there are certain resources in the economy that are not used or unemployed or underemployed. Okay, so actually we're more likely to see production somewhere within this possibility frontier. And this X here could, for example, represent actual output. Now that's an interesting concept because it also then allows us to consider a really important fundamental term in economics, which is the fact that we are not using all of our resources to their full capacity. So it actually underemployment or unemployment of our resources. Okay, so we're starting to get a bit of a good picture here, aren't we, about the general concepts where we look at actual output, we look at potential output, we look at unemployment or underemployment of resources. We can also calculate opportunity cost. Okay, now let's have a think about this. If we see this X moving closer to our line, what are we actually suggesting? Well, we're now suggesting there is a lower level of unemployment. We are using more of our resources. We are closer to our potential output. This actually allows us to show economic growth. we're actually producing more goods, we're using more resources, we are moving closer to our full level of output or our potential output. So it can be used to show us a lot of really interesting concepts. But don't forget, it's all very vague. Okay? It's not as precise as some of the other models. It is a very basic concept that we're using here. Next, this line, our potential output line, could shift. So what we're actually saying here, well, if it shifts outwards, we have to think, okay, so what might increase the potential output of an entire economy? Okay, one of the best examples is population growth or immigration or the development of a brand new technology that makes the use of our resources much more efficient. Okay, so it's potentially, you could, ironically, you could increase your potential output. Okay, and that would mean an entire shift of that line. Also, we could find that there's something terrible happens, okay, whether there's a war, a famine, a plague, a disease, something which actually cripples your economy, something which takes away a large amount of your resources. We could actually see your potential of your economy falling significantly. Okay, so we could see that this which is our original PPF, it could shift outwards, or it could shift inwards. Okay, so we need to think about what are the reasons that could happen. Why might that happen? If your potential output is shifting outwards, that's normally some sort of positive reason. You've found more resources. You've got more potential. Okay? If it shifts inwards, it means that your economy is being restricted in some way. You've lost resources. You've destroyed infrastructure. There's been a significant amount of deaths to your population. You've lost workers. Okay? So do be aware that this can shift backwards and forwards. But don't forget, that is potential output. Okay? Not actual output. Okay, we'll leave it at that.